Welcome to the Global News Podcast from the BBC. I'm Uncle Desai, and on this episode, we're joined by our music correspondent, Mark Savage, who's in Vienna in Austria, where this year's Eurovision Song Contest is taking place. Mark, great to have you with us. Let's begin then with the headlines. A number of nations have boycotted this year's event due to Israel's participation. And on top of that, in the auditorium at the first semi-final, there was audible booing. Let's kick off with what we know so far.
Certainly on the TV broadcast, you could hear some anti-Israel chants, but you could also hear a lot of people chanting the name of the Israeli act. So there is a mixed reception. And I think, that's kind of what has been happening for the last 3 years at Eurovision. I remember being in Malmo in 2024, and that year it was really incredibly tense. We were staying in the same hotel as Eden Golan, who was the singer representing Israel. There were armed guards on the entrances, on every floor. There were protests in the streets every day of the contest. She had death threats in the run-up to her taking part in the contest. And so it was just incredibly, you could feel it in the air. It was febrile, the atmosphere, and a lot of the other contestants were very unhappy. There was a lot of backstage strife and tension. There were accusations that the Israeli delegation had been using the contest as almost sort of PR. They were surreptitiously taking photographs of their contestant with other people and putting them up on social media, and a lot of people felt uncomfortable with that. But in the end, the audience who were listening to the song actually really enjoyed the song that she put together, and that's been a pattern for Israel in the last couple of contests, is that they have placed in the top 10 despite all of the political arguments that are going around involving their participation.
Mark, just remind us of those political arguments as well, from fans, but as well as host broadcasters too.
So the row over Israel's participation really started in 2024, just a couple of months after the war in Gaza began, obviously in response to the Hamas attacks of 7th of October 2023, and the death toll there, especially the death toll involving women and children. A lot of contestants have voiced concerns over Israel's participation and said that, why is Israel being allowed to participate when Russia was banned in 2022? They feel that during this period, when there is aggressive military action, as they would characterise it in the Middle East, that those countries should not be allowed to take part. Now, the EBU, which organises Eurovision, says that there is a difference in the way that those two conflicts have played out. Russia's state broadcaster, who is the organisation that puts forward their Eurovision act, has ceased to be independent. It is now essentially considered by the EBU part of the propaganda tool of Vladimir Putin's government, and therefore that makes them in breach of their conditions of membership of the European Broadcasting Union. On the other hand, Can, which is the Israeli broadcaster, it is independent. It has been in opposition to Netanyahu's government on several occasions, and in fact the government have on some occasions tried to shut them down. And one of the EBU's points that they make when they argue for the inclusion of Israel is that if they were to be taken out of the contest, it would jeopardise the independence of the broadcaster, because it would give the government an excuse to shut them down.
Mark, the BBC have also been speaking to the director of Eurovision, who's been talking about voting patterns, which became quite a controversy last year as well. Can you just explain to us what he had to say and what happened?
Last year, ahead of the contest, which took place in Basel in Switzerland, there was a concerted campaign by the Israeli government and, in fact, by Prime Minister Netanyahu to get people to vote for the Israeli act. They spent a huge amount of money putting adverts on social media, instructing people to vote up to 20 times, which is the maximum that they were allowed to for the Israeli act. And when it came to the final vote, although Israel had done quite poorly with the juries, who are professional songwriters that judge the songs on the merits of their composition, Israel was the absolute runaway favourite in the public vote. In fact, it was 81% of their score came from the public vote, as compared to Austria, which came second, and only 41% of their total score came from the public vote. So there was a feeling amongst some broadcasters that Israel had tried to tip the scales in their favour through these social media campaigns. Now, the EBU says that those votes had not actually affected the ultimate outcome of the contest, that the voting procedure had been robust. However, with that in mind, they have tightened up the voting procedures this year. You're now only allowed to make a maximum of 10 votes, and you have to register a credit card and be able to vote online. The idea there being that they are ensuring that the votes are coming from the country of origin, so it's tied to the location, and you can't use burner phones or credit cards that are registered in different countries in order to inflate your total vote. Now, Martin Green, who's the director of the EBU and of the Eurovision Song Contest, he spoke to my colleague Noam Bettan last night, just ahead of the semi-final, and he said they had absolute faith in the voting security for this year, but they will be paying extra attention to anything that might sway the public in the way that they feel might have happened last year. He also said that the EBU had instructed Israel's contestant this year, Noam Bettan, to take down a post that he had made encouraging people to use all 10 of their votes for his song this year.
And geopolitics seems to have been quite the issue in recent years as well. Just break down to us as well how sometimes certain nations and certain regions will vote in certain blocks and will support their neighbours sometimes, and sometimes geopolitical issues will determine who ultimately wins.
Well, yeah, I'll take that in two parts. So, like you said, there is vote trading that goes on at the Eurovision Song Contests. Countries are likely to vote for their neighbours or for people who share cultural or aesthetic links with them. So you will usually see Cyprus and Greece voting for each other, or Denmark and Sweden voting for each other. But crucially, those vote trades aren't really enough to affect the overall outcome. If you want to win Eurovision, your song has to be good enough to attract the votes of people in 30, nearly 40 countries. And so it's almost impossible to engineer that just by having some friendly neighbours, right? But geopolitically, Eurovision has always had a reputation for addressing politics through the acts that are sent, the topics that they sing about, and this goes right back to 1956, the first ever competition. There were only 7 nations that year, but Germany sent a Jewish survivor of the Holocaust, really making a statement that they wanted to move away from the horrors of the Second World War. And that continues throughout the next 70 years, so in the 1960s, there were protests over Spain taking part. We had Greece pulling out over Turkey's invasion of Cyprus. There was also in that same year Portugal using their entry to trigger an armed uprising against the fascist dictatorship in their country. So politics has always been tied into Eurovision. As much as the organisers would like us to say it's apolitical, it's about building bridges through culture, the politics of the time are expressed in the songs.
Mark, do you get any sense that this row could shape how maybe the contest is viewed in the future regarding future boycotts or future participation as well?
I mean, I think it's already reshaping the contest. To lose 5 big countries, big participants in Eurovision in 1 year is a huge upheaval for the contest. The people who pulled out this year include some of the biggest names in Eurovision. Ireland are the joint biggest winners. They've won the contest 7 times in the past. Spain, who pulled out, were one of the 5 main financial contributors to the contest. And so their absence is really very keenly felt here. Martin Green, the director of the contest, said to us last night that it's like having a family dinner where 5 members of the family are missing, and they are desperate for them to return. But I think, people are watching very closely how the public vote is conducted this year, whether there is any attempt to influence it, and how the contest plays out. I think it will be interesting to see the conversations that are had in the coming months, whether any of those countries who've boycotted this year will return, or whether more will join them. And I think it really is a crunch point for Eurovision. It has been controversial before, there have been boycotts before, but this one does really feel like it's a crucial turning point for the contest.
Mark, thank you for your time as always. We'll let you get back to enjoying the delights of Eurovision. Mark Savage there, our music correspondent in Austria, Vienna. Right, do click on the link below if you want more from the Global News podcast. For now, thanks so much for your company, and we'll see you on the next one.